4 announcements, 1 company, 1 year. Any single one of them would have been the biggest story in tech. Together, they're rewriting what Apple is and what the entire industry becomes next. Tim Cook is leaving. After 15 years, the man who built Apple into a $4 trillion institution is stepping aside. His replacement, a mechanical engineer who has spent 25 years inside this company, making sure the things Apple promises actually exist when you hold them in your hands. The AI assistant Apple has been promising for 2 years finally arrived at WWDC 2026, powered in one of the most remarkable admissions in Silicon Valley history by a rival's artificial intelligence, $1 billion a year paid to Google to make Siri worth using. The first foldable iPhone in the company's history is coming this September, expected to start above $2,000. With a near invisible crease, Apple's engineers reportedly pursued regardless of cost. And underneath all of it, a $600 billion bet that Apple's future is made in America. None of those are small stories. All 4 are happening at once. To understand why 2026 matters so much, you have to understand what Apple became under Tim Cook. When Cook took the job from Steve Jobs in 2011, the skeptics were immediate and loud. Cook was a supply chain man, not a visionary. Apple, they said, would lose its soul. They were wrong. Under Cook, Apple grew from a $350 billion company to a $4 trillion one. The Apple Watch, AirPods, the M-series chip that made every other laptop maker question their engineering assumptions, the App Store, generating more annual revenue than most sovereign wealth funds manage. Cook's Apple didn't invent the future the way Jobs did. It manufactured it at scale with a discipline so precise that quarterly earnings calls became the most watched events in global finance. Then in April 2026, without much warning, Apple announced the transition. Cook would step down on September 1st. 15 years, done. His successor, John Ternus, 51 years old, a competitive swimmer in college, a mechanical engineering graduate from the University of Pennsylvania who walked into Apple's product design team in 2001 and never really left. He has been the man behind the hardware for every iPhone, every iPad, the Mac's move to Apple Silicon, and the Vision Pro. For 2.5 decades, he's been the person responsible for the gap, or the absence of a gap, between what Apple promises and what actually ships. Cook described Ternus as having the mind of an engineer, the soul of an innovator, and the heart to lead with integrity and honor. Less covered, Cook wiped a tear during his closing remarks at what turned out to be his final WWDC keynote. 15 years of a life handed to someone else. Ternus walks into a company reporting its best March quarter in history. $111 billion in revenue, up 17% year over year. iPhone revenue alone, $57 billion, up 22%. The numbers look extraordinary, but the questions waiting for him are the kind that quarterly earnings cannot answer. June 8th, 2026, Apple Park, Cupertino. Tim Cook walks onto the WWDC stage for the last time as chief executive. In the auditorium, thousands of developers who have built their businesses on Apple's platforms. In the room, the weight of a very long delay. Apple had been promising a transformed Siri for 2 full years. Each quarter, the question got louder. ChatGPT had crossed 900 million weekly active users. Google had folded Gemini into everything. Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, all of them moving faster on artificial intelligence than the company that invented a voice assistant in the first place. In January 2026 came the announcement that told you exactly where Apple's AI actually stood. Apple and Google confirmed a multi-year partnership. Google's Gemini models, the intelligence Apple had been positioned as competing against would now power the next generation of Apple intelligence. The deal, approximately $1 billion per year. Apple, the most vertically integrated company in the history of consumer technology, was buying its most important new feature from a rival. For a company that had spent a decade insisting it could do artificial intelligence entirely on its own terms, this was a remarkable moment, not a catastrophe, but an admission. Daniel Newman, CEO of the Futurum Group, said what a lot of people in the industry were thinking. It was ticking a box, but still uninspiring. That, after years of fits and starts, Apple hadn't given consumers enough reason to believe they could be trusted with this particular promise. Apple's software chief, Craig Federighi, pushed back directly on stage. He produced an empty chart. "This is the amount of Google Assistant we use," he said. "Nothing." The Gemini partnership, Apple argues, was used to build entirely new foundation models from the ground up. The intelligence is Apple's. Google provided the starting material. What arrived was called Siri AI. The rebrand alone was a burial. The old Siri, famous for mishearing requests, defaulting to web searches, responding to complex questions with the digital equivalent of a shrug, was interred under a new name and a new architecture. Siri AI holds multi-turn conversations, understands what is on your screen, and executes multi-step tasks across multiple apps without asking for permission at every turn. On the Apple Watch, for the first time, it works as a full conversational agent rather than a command parser. The catch: it won't be available at launch in the European Union or in China. Two of Apple's most critical markets left on the outside, at least initially. A rebuilt AI assistant that cannot reach hundreds of millions of its most sophisticated users is a launch with a very large asterisk. Now, the entire smartphone industry has been watching Apple approach for nearly a decade. Every major competitor moved first. Samsung launched its Galaxy Fold in 2019. Google followed. Chinese manufacturers pushed the engineering further, competing on crease reduction and hinge durability in ways that redefined what the category could do. Apple watched and waited. Not because it didn't have answers, but because the answers it had weren't good enough yet. Specifically, the crease. Every foldable on the market has a visible ridge down the center of its inner display, a permanent reminder that the screen folds. Apple's engineers reportedly pursued eliminating it regardless of cost. What arrives in September is expected to be called the iPhone Ultra. The design is unlike any foldable before it. Where Samsung and Google fold vertically, tall and narrow, the iPhone Ultra folds horizontally, like a book, like a passport. When open, a 7.76-inch inner display, the footprint of an iPad mini. When closed, a 5.5-inch outer screen for quick tasks. When unfolded, 4.5 millimeters thin. A laser-drilled metal plate beneath the flexible display distributes stress across the fold rather than concentrating it at the center. Multiple sources describe the crease as nearly invisible. In a category defined by that compromise, removing it changes everything. The A20 chip runs on a 2-nanometer process, 15% faster, 30% more efficient. The hinge is titanium. The compromises are real. No telephoto camera, no Face ID. Instead, Touch ID in the power button. Starting price? Approximately $2,000. The most expensive iPhone ever made. This isn't a device for everyone. It's for the person who wants an iPhone and an iPad mini and is willing to pay for the engineering required to make them one object. The question isn't whether Apple can sell them. At this level of anticipation, demand will almost certainly exceed supply. The question is whether the iPhone Ultra defines the foldable category on Apple's terms, or arrives late to someone else's. All of this, the new chief executive, the rebuilt AI assistant, the first foldable iPhone, sits on top of something that moves slower than a product launch but may matter more in the long run. Apple has committed $600 billion to the United States economy over 4 years. This week, a $30 billion deal with Broadcom in Fort Collins, Colorado, is producing more than 15 billion American-made chips, and it is Apple's largest single manufacturing commitment ever. Already running, TSMC's Arizona fab is producing iPhone chips. A server plant in Houston is building the hardware that powers Apple Intelligence. Corning's Kentucky facility is fully dedicated to cover glass for every iPhone and Apple Watch shipped worldwide. Apple has absorbed $3.3 billion in tariff costs since current trade policies took effect, choosing to eat them rather than raise prices. So far. The skeptics are worth hearing. Analysts note that labor cost differentials mean Asia will remain the core of iPhone manufacturing for the foreseeable future. But more than 20 billion chips have already been sourced from 24 factories across 12 American states. These are real factories, real workers, real production. Whether this represents genuine industrial transformation or a sophisticated response to political pressure is a question that will take a decade to answer honestly. On September 1st, 2026, John Ternus becomes the 8th chief executive of Apple. He walks into a $4 trillion company about to launch the most anticipated iPhone since the original. He also walks into a company whose AI assistant is powered by its most prominent competitor, whose manufacturing future rests on a commitment still being built, and whose most expensive product yet enters a category it did not define. None of that is catastrophic. Apple has navigated harder transitions, near bankruptcy in 1997, the loss of its founder in 2011, a global supply chain collapse in the early 2020s. It emerged from each moment stronger, stranger, and more valuable than anyone predicted. But the industry watching Apple in 2026 is asking the version of the question that has followed this company since the beginning. Does Apple still know what it is supposed to be? The iPhone Ultra is a bet that hardware can still move the world. Siri AI is a bet that a 2-year delay and a $1 billion partnership can be erased with a new name and a rebuilt architecture. The $600 billion commitment is a bet that supply chain sovereignty is worth building from scratch. And John Ternus, the engineer who spent 25 years making sure the gap between Apple's promises and its products is as small as physics allows, is the bet that the next era of this company belongs to the people who build things, not the people who sell them. 4 bets, placed simultaneously, on the same table. The question every competitor in tech is now working through is exactly the one Apple has always forced on everyone else. What do you do when the company everyone thought was slowing down decides to run? If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the next video on your screen for another interesting breakdown on the latest technology. There's a lot more coming.